Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Iran elects a new president, and an alleged mass murderer suspected of crimes against humanity is the winner by a landslide. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority throwing away 1 million coronavirus vaccines as they call for investigation into a supposed major scandal with Israel. And then finally, masks are back. Health authorities reinstating limited restrictions after another COVID outbreak is reported in an Israeli school. Jerusalem continuing to attack Hamas infrastructure in Gaza over the weekend after days of continuous Palestinian arson attacks aimed at southern Israeli civilian communities. Israel reportedly likewise signaling that it's prepared to resume a more massive campaign of targeted airstrikes against the Strip, such as those seen during the 11-day conflict in May. Unless, of course, the terror group stops its incitement, stops the terror balloons, and holds true to the terms of the ceasefire. Historically, Prime Minister Bennett has also often stated that if he were in charge of defense, Israel would not hold back from, quote, eliminating Palestinians engaged in launching incendiary balloons. In other news, Iran finally announcing the results of its presidential race on Saturday, with Ibrahim Raisi winning in a landslide. But all around the world, Raisi's name sounding alarms, and not just because he supports Iran's nuclearization, but rather it's because Raisi, who's seen as Ayatollah Khamenei's protege, has also earned several other names, including the executioner and the butcher of Tehran. Rights group Amnesty International, for one, even calling for Raisi to be investigated for crimes against humanity, while Israeli officials are likewise calling for the West to wake up.
This weekend, Iran chose a new president, Ibrahim Raisi. Of all the people that Khamenei could have chosen, he chose the hangman of Tehran, the man infamous among Iranians and across the world for leading the death committees, which executed thousands of innocent Iranian citizens throughout the years. Raisi's selection is, I would say, the last chance for the world powers to wake up before returning to the nuclear agreement and to understand who they're doing business with. These guys are murderers, mass murderers. A regime of brutal hangmen must never be allowed to have weapons of mass destruction that will enable it to not to kill thousands but millions. Israel's position will not change on this.
Still, and even while lamenting that Iranians were likely also denied a fair election, United States officials are saying that they'll continue indirect talks in Vienna on returning to the JCPOA nuclear deal. Joining me with more is research fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism at the IDC Herzliya, Dr. Fadi Ismail. Dr. Ismail, thank you so much for being with us. Now let's start with Raisi. What can you tell us about him, and what kind of president do you think he'll be?
Thank you for having me. Well, everything that you said in the opening is already known. The man wasn't named the hangman of Tehran for no reason. He is an ultra hardliner, which is actually a logical choice right now because the world has changed for Iran. With the change of the administration in Washington, D.C., they have less of a need of displaying flexibility or leniency towards the West. So choosing there's a point I want to make here. We say those words, hardliner, more moderate, in the end, they're all the same school. So this is a point that sometimes I fall. It's a mistake I sometimes make when I refer to them by those terms. We have to understand all of these presidents, one after the other, are actually officials who work for the supreme leader. And they all come from exactly the same school, but they have different images in the West and different backgrounds in terms of the operational experience that they bring with them. So when we have a change in so-called in a guy or in an approach or in a in the president, it's really a message from the supreme leadership, the mullahs who actually run Iran. It's a message to the rest of the world. In terms of the policy in principle is the same. It's just the tone, the music will change. Raisi is definitely a conductor, if we keep on with that, the metaphor for music, is definitely a conductor that uses very strong crescendos and is not someone who projects an image of moderate policies, like perhaps some people thought other presidents did. In the end, Iran is Iran, and the revolution is a revolution. This is a point that's very important to see. Right now, we have in the Middle East a situation where America is pulling out its resources. Recently, we've heard that the U.S. is removing some additional removal of Patriot missile batteries that were supposed to protect the Gulf, and we haven't even finished the negotiations yet. So, in terms of Iran, it makes sense as good negotiators to actually harden their position. And the choice of this president, who was actually has been chosen before the elections even happened, is a message. It's within that logic.
All right. Well, so I want to come back in a moment to the United States and the JCPOA P5+1 powers. But for now, this election, I want to stay on Iran. This election had Iran's lowest voter turnout on record. Several candidates, including so-called reformists, as you called them, dropped out of the race at the last minute. Yet, as the votes were tallied, Raisi won in a landslide. How much support does Raisi actually have amongst the general Iranian public? Does the public support him? And does that public support actually even matter? Is there anything that they can do if they disagree with him?
I think by now we know these so-called elections in these kinds of countries mean very little. How can you possibly know what the opinion of the public is when there is no freedom of opinion, of expression? I mean, people do what people have to do. It isn't. We can't use those Western type of concepts to try and read these kinds of dictatorships. It just doesn't work. I think I spoke about this in a previous interview for ILTV. We have a tendency, which I always warn about, to use Western concepts to read other societies. That doesn't work. The idea of what the street wants right now in a dictatorship like that is of no consequence. It is only of consequence when the street rebels. And there's nobody here today in the world that will help or assist the Iranian street if some kind of Iranian spring will erupt. There's no force, no power in the world that will stand behind such a possible forces within the Iranian society. And this is why I think that we can still safely say that the street currently doesn't really matter much because there's nothing behind it.
Thank you again so much, Fadi Ismail, for joining us and for all of your insights and for sticking around with us. Everybody watching at home, again, if you'd like to see the extended interview between myself and Dr. Fadi Ismail, please go online to ILTV.tv or to our YouTube or Facebook pages. Thank you so much. And now, top Israeli officials projecting strength and unity in matters of security and foreign affairs. But internally, the walls of the new government showing serious signs of stress. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett finishing his first week leading the nation alongside the new Unity Coalition. And beaming, Bennett on social media repeating goals to do good things for the people. But the government's stability seemingly at risk from all sides. First, Ram MK Saeed al-Harumi, who abstained during the vote for government confirmation, warned that he may still exit the coalition for good. He's not yet indicated, however, if this means that he'll join the opposition or leave politics altogether, which would allow the next person on the Ram list to enter Knesset and likely save the coalition. Meanwhile, a controversial law slated for renewal but meeting with trouble. The law makes it more difficult for Palestinians to gain Israeli citizenship or residency status through marriage. Critics of the law saying that it's racist and intended only to keep the Arab population down. But passing in 2003, the measure came out of concerns that terror groups had been abusing the family reunification law to infiltrate the state, and it's been extended every year since. Still, Meretz MK Isawi Frej, now the latest to threaten the renewal, saying he'll refuse to back the law as it's written. So coalition members are hoping to pick up the slack with members from across the aisle. The only problem there is that former Prime Minister and now head of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, using the vote as an opportunity to embarrass the new government with an early failure. Moving on, the Palestinian Authority now rejecting the delivery of over 1 million coronavirus vaccines from Israel. And this after just receiving the first shipment of roughly 100,000 doses. Palestinian officials claiming to have been duped because the vaccines are set to expire at the end of June and then later at the end of July. The Palestinian Authority even now demanding an investigation into what they're calling the vaccine scandal. But Israel is insisting that the doses are perfectly sound, identical to those given to Israelis, and that anyways, the Palestinian Authority knew full well about the pending expiration dates. In fact, officials earlier announced that this was kind of the point. According to the agreement reached with Pfizer's involvement, Israel would provide over 1 million vaccines to the Palestinian Authority and in return receive the PA's shipment of Pfizer vaccines, which are scheduled to arrive in September. This way, Palestinians could get vaccinated sooner and Israel could restore its stocks at a later date. So why cancel the deal? Well, joining me to discuss is CEO of Honest Reporting, Daniel Pomerantz, and on Zoom, Professor Nadav Davidovich, Director of the School of Public Health at Ben-Gurion University and Interim Chair for the Association of Public Health Physicians. Thank you both so much for joining me. Now, Professor Davidovich, I'm actually going to start with you. Is there anything wrong with the vaccine if it's nearing its expiration date? Is it less effective? Does it last less?
No, there are also options to extend. Of course, when you get the approval of the pharmaceutical experts, including Pfizer. But I think there is something much deeper here. All the public health community, including myself, we signed a position paper already beginning of February that it's Israel interest to bring the Palestinians vaccinations. Of course, not just because of our interest, but also because of human rights and humanitarian aspects. And already from the beginning of February, there are negotiations to do this kind of deal that finally was approved last week. I know for sure that the Director General of the Ministry of Health, Professor Chazi Levy, was involved, Dr. Sharon Al-Roee, the Director of Public Health Services. And because of the political atmosphere or lack of, focus of attention, the thing was delayed and delayed. Last Monday, there was a Supreme Court decision to delay the whole issue up until October. And many human rights organizations like Physicians for Human Rights, sent a letter to the new Minister of Health, Nitzan Horowitz. And I need to say that both Nitzan Horowitz and the Prime Minister Bennett approved it quite quickly, but now this was already more than 2 months later, and bringing the situation that the vaccines, some part of it at least, are very close to expiration because there is no trust, enough trust between Palestinians and Israel. This created, this whole situation with internal disputes. I think this is just showing us that with more attention, this whole issue could be solved 2 months ago and save lives. And this is, again, according to all public health experts in Israel.
So, Professor, theoretically speaking, because I know that in Israel, within the first 2 weeks of the vaccination campaign, we vaccinated roughly 1.5 million people. Could the Palestinian Authority have theoretically or logistically used the vaccines that Israel was providing them, even though the plan was delayed?
Theoretically, yes, but I think that the whole context of having this deal approved almost last minute, with criticism within the Palestinian society and the lack of trust, again, between all parties, the fact that there is all secrecy about how many vaccines are in Israel, and all the idea of vaccine nationalism, instead of creating more regional approaches, I think it created an atmosphere that was not, exactly the best to move forward. I really hope that the Palestinians will be going to use the vaccines because I think this can save lives. I regret that Israel didn't gave the Palestinians the vaccines already 2 months ago.
Okay, so Daniel, first of all, Professor, thank you so much. Daniel, I want to turn to you now. Walk me through what's happening, because again, the decision, at least from what I can tell, comes after a very long chronology of propaganda and twists and turns. I mean, the timeline I have is that the Palestinian Authority initially firmly states that it neither wants nor needs Israel's help in getting vaccines. Israel's then blamed for not helping in the West. The Palestinian Authority jumps on that bandwagon. Then Israel is now offering to help. The PA agreed and now canceled it at the last second, alleging a scandal. Am I missing something?
Well, you're right on point, actually. The Palestinian Authority government has been turning down Israeli help since December. So this idea that had Israel come to an internal agreement 2 months earlier, all of this would have been done 2 months ago is nothing less than absolutely naive. The Palestinian Authority has the right under international law to accept or refuse aid. Israel has the obligation to respect the Palestinian government's autonomy. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with expiration dates. On our staff, one of our editors, Kiva van Koningswald, working with our managing editor, Charles Bibelser, revealed that just last Friday, the Palestinian Ministry of Health announced that it has the capacity to vaccinate at the pace of 80,000 shots per day. That means that the full 1.4 million doses that Israel is offering could be administered in 17 and a half days, well before the expiration date, which is 6 weeks from now. But that wasn't the reason at all. Khaled Abu Toameh, a Palestinian-Israeli journalist, wrote this morning in the Jerusalem Post that when the Palestinian government announced this deal, you'd think Palestinian people would be happy. The Palestinian street exploded with objection. They said it was a scandal. They said it was normalizing the occupation, which is a phrase that refers to recognizing Israel's existence at all. And they demanded that the Palestinian Authority back off of this deal, which is exactly what the Palestinian Authority
Could the Palestinian Authority have not explained that receiving vaccines from Israel doesn't normalize anything, really? Or does it?
Well, it does, because it shows that the Palestinian government is interacting with what they refer to as the Zionist entity.
Well, they do that anyway with security control and certain administrative governance.
They try to do it in a way that isn't terribly public. They try to hide that as much as possible so that people don't realize that it's happening. It's very hard to avoid the knowledge that it's happening. It's being done both with Israel and through Pfizer. It's a major international deal. And for the better part of a year, the Palestinian government has been telling Palestinian people that any medical help that comes from Israel is poison and is designed to harm Palestinian people. So if that's the information that you have, it wouldn't be surprising or even unreasonable to be a little suspicious of help coming from Israel, which your own government has been telling you up until now could potentially be poisonous.
All right, and if you'd like to see more from that interview, please make sure to go online to ILTV.tv or search ILTV on Facebook or on YouTube. Now, maybe we jinxed it with early celebrations, maybe it was carelessness, or maybe it was just a matter of time. But whatever the reason, Israel is now mulling renewed restrictions as another school reports an outbreak of coronavirus. Just days after an outbreak at a school in Modi'in where 11 students were infected with coronavirus, at least 44 kids at a middle school in Binyamina of northern Israel also now testing positive. An initial testing indicating that both outbreaks are likely from the so-called Delta variant, which was first identified in India and seems to be both more contagious and more resistant to vaccines. The health ministry then ordering all schools in both cities to reinstate their mask rules indoors and outdoors. And the mayor of Modi'in even going one step further, reinstating mask regulations for the whole town. Meanwhile, amid fears of a new nationwide outbreak, particularly with the same Delta variant, the health ministry may soon reinstate some nationwide restrictions as well. The proposed renewals, including self-isolation orders for anyone who is over 14 years old, unvaccinated, and returning from high-risk locations abroad. And if passed, the isolation would either be at home with an electronic bracelet or in a state-run hotel. All right, now some health restrictions may soon be reinforced following the recent outbreaks of coronavirus in several Israeli schools. But most of the country is still moving onwards and upwards, and most notably, it's the return of the theaters. So television host and content creator Lyra Notice joins me with more on the best upcoming performances. Lyra, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, first of all. I just came back from the UK, and things are different here. It's crazy.
Yeah, we're open.
Yeah. So in Israel, things are open again, and people go to theaters and cinemas, and that's why I'm here for. First of all, for me, culture in Israel, it's like Mediterranean salad, sort of. You have lots of ingredients. Everything is so fresh. Sometimes it's crazy. You have surprises.
And it's cut very small, so you can't mix it out.
Yeah, so that's how I mean I look up to the Israeli cultures. Theaters and actors and young talents have so much to give here. My sister is an actress. My brother-in-law is an actor. My friends are actors who just were desired to go back. So we have today 4 events that I just wanted to recommend on. The first one is well, it's an oldie. It's an old school that the Revolution Orchestra decided to renew, we can say. So first of all, let's have a look. Small glimpse from the new show. It's called A Concerto for the Gashash HaChiver. There's no other way to say it. Let's have a look.
Let's check it out.
So as you can see, Gashash HaChiver is very old school type of theme.
Yeah.
My parents were growing up on that theme. Well, I actually have to say that I Wikipedia it sort of, because I didn't know what is the year that Gashash HaChiver was established for.
But I know know exactly. My parents also, they grew up on that.
Yeah, so what the Revolution Orchestra tried to do here is to rejoin young generation and our parents and great-grandparents together at the same theater. And what a great way to do that without any lighting, new lighting to do that. I mean, you can have the cinema, as you can see, the screen.
Yeah.
It's nothing. It's getting crazier. And you have Dikla Hadar and Dror Keren, which are both beautiful, amazing, talented actors. And they came together to the stage to sort of give it a kick to the salad, as they can say.
Some spice.
Yeah,
and gave it some zazz.
It's totally zazz. I mean, so first of all, I have to say, I tried to buy my parents tickets. There's no tickets. It's all sale, so overbooked. So try to re-ticket, try to rebook things with them specifically.
Yeah.
Dates will open again soon.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the other 3. Maybe something we can go and see.
Yeah, no, you definitely can go see them, but you have to be, on time to just book it. So the next one will be Nikui Rosh LaShabak, which is, if people know, I mean, Shabak is one of the most...
Shin Bet, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the most well-organized, respected, secretive organization in Israel. What happens when you take the Shabak, this ginormous institute, and make it into a comedy, a play on stage? Let's have a look.
בבקשה, מחמוד חנה מחמוד, ואת, אל תעשי שום דבר שאני לגמרי הייתי עושה.
כן, תשלחו את המח"ט.
מפקד חטיבה.
כן, שיגיע לתאג"ד.
תחנה יוסף גדודי.
ושיביא איתו את השב"ח.
שוהה בלתי חוקי.
All right, so what did we see?
It's a comic play. It's getting crazy. I mean, the actors are running on stage. There's lots of going on. They try to show you what happens when the Shabak becomes so comic. So the secrets behind this institute getting messy when a love story comes to the stage. So I recommend it to anybody. I have to see it. I didn't buy a ticket yet, but just look up for it. Nikui Rosh LaShabak.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll find tickets.
It looks very entertaining. Now, I just want to say, if anybody wants to come and see and learn more about these amazing shows, please go online, check out this full interview with Lyra Notice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Well, skies have cleared up for the next day or so, and this evening, meteorologists calling for lows between 14 to 20 degrees Celsius, depending on the area, and highs in the upper 20s, but mostly 30s in Celsius tomorrow. Now back to Aaron in the studio.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.28 shekels to the American dollar and 2.63 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Have a very, very happy Father's Day, and thank you so much for watching.